Welcome again, and thank you for joining this socially distanced meeting on the subject of the budget. My special thanks to the speakers for sparing their time. The whole world is consumed by the pandemic. Its human and economic cost and how governments respond will shape the world we live in for the coming years. As most people think of the future, the one thought that comes to mind above everything else is uncertainty and precariousness. Our lives have been upended by the virus. People feel insecure about their health, their loved ones, their jobs, their income. And at such times, people turn to the government for comfort and relief. So it's in this environment that GOP is preparing, and they have the unenviable task of preparing this coming budget. I hope they will do so with empathy, and they will put people first. In a few days, we will know the government's response. Today, we are fortunate to have with us leading experts in the country to share their views on the subject. And after their talks, we will open the discussion. I hope we will have enough time to get as many views as possible. On many occasions, he successfully negotiated delicate challenges faced by the country, as in 1998 when Pakistan the nuclear device under the threat of aid cutoff. And the next year, in 1990, as our relations with India took a sudden turn for the worse. Pakistan has always gained from his extensive knowledge and experience. It is a great honor to request Mr. Sartaj Aziz for his comments. Sir.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Other member of the panel, I'm glad to join you. As Ashraf Hayat said in his introductory comments, the entire human race is in a state of panic and uncertainty because we all realize that the pandemic may last a few months or a year. The economic and social consequences of this pandemic are going to last much longer and could change the very nature of economic activity that we undertake. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, the economy was already in dire straits even before Corona. The growth rate, which was 5.8% in 2017-18, had gone down to 1.9% in the first year, 18-19, and this year the forecast was only 2.4%. The rate of inflation had also gone up from 4 to 12%. Exports were almost stagnant, and revenues fell in actual terms for the first time. So in this dire situation after Corona, these economic fundamentals seem to be undergoing a further deterioration. With the economic activities across the board suspended or reduced substantially, for the first time we may see a negative -6% growth rate according to some estimates. This will lead to large-scale unemployment, and the estimate of unemployment today is over 20% and could go as high as 30%. That will add about 20 million unemployed breadwinners, which means 6 times as many people affected by this rate. This unprecedented jump in unemployment will have a much larger impact on poverty. And even before the pandemic, 28% of the population, according to some estimates, were living below the poverty line. That is 63 million people, or about 10 million households. Now you add another 20 million households after the pandemic, and the scale of poverty will hit you like a thunderbolt. These two interrelated problems of poverty and employment, of course, are closely related to the size and pace of economic revival, both in the formal and in the informal sector. Therefore, these two problems should be the main focus of the budget. But in my view, these cannot be resolved only through ad hoc measures. What we need is a post-corona economic revival plan for the short run, 1 year, and medium run, which is 3 years. This will require a comprehensive approach, which means financial as well as non-financial measures, sustainable fiscally and administratively, and also mutually reinforcing strategies and sub-strategies. If this is done, we will realize that many subsectors like travel, transport, tourism, sports, and entertainment will require many years to regain the pre-corona level. These, therefore, will require a very different set of policies from those that can be revived relatively quickly with appropriate policies and incentives. I can only deal with the last category because the first category is much more complex. In terms of revival, in my view, the most important sector is agriculture. It is not only labor intensive, it's 19-20% of GDP, but provides employment to 40%. But it also has an important role in controlling inflation and also promoting exports. And it's easier to enforce corona-related SOPs in the agriculture sector than in other sectors. By way of example, I can say that in the 90s, when Pakistan was facing sanction, it was the agriculture sector which saved us by achieving a growth rate of 4.6%, while the industrial growth rate in the 90s was only 4.4%. And that was possible because of favorable terms of trade, which means the ratio of output to input prices was in favor of agriculture. Since then, these terms of trade have deteriorated, and our growth rate has been around 3, and some years much lower than 3. So now if you have this overall plan that I talked about, then a careful examination of the terms of trade, all the factors which affect the cost of production would be examined. And in my view, all duties and taxes which raise the cost of production have to be brought down, because output prices are likely to be depressed because of the fall in oil prices and lower demand. And therefore, the only thing we do is to reduce all the input prices. So the reduction of all the duties would be important. The second would be enhancement of agriculture credit at reduced and reasonable interest rate. And our targets, if the overall interest rate is brought down to 6% instead of 8%, agriculture credit can be made available at 8-9% rather than 14-16% that is now the rate. The third area is investment in water management and water conservation, particularly for enhancing the productivity of water today. The National Water Policy that was approved by the Council of Common Interest on 23rd April 2018 provides a complete roadmap of all the actions and policies and investment required in the water sector, but unfortunately it has not received much attention so far. Even the National Water Council, chaired by the Prime Minister, has not even met once in these 2 years. Fourth, we need to pay special attention to cotton, because that is a crop which has really suffered, and on that our textile industry also depends. Again, a report to the Cabinet in March 2018 has laid out what needs to be done, because it's not just the cotton policy, but sugarcane policy, which has to be revised if the cotton policy has to succeed. And in the medium run, of course, Pakistan has to move to high-value agriculture, like livestock and horticulture, and also from chemical agriculture to organic and then natural agriculture. The second sector that is important in this context is construction. A package has already been out for the construction sector, but 2 constraints remain. One is the inefficient and corrupt system of land transfer and building control, which will adversely affect this sector. And secondly, the high cost of credit, because this is long-term investment and not can sustain high. So I hope as the policy rate comes down, the capital will become available to the construction sector at lower rates. The third important sector is SMEs. As we all know, it is a very important labor-intensive sector. By way of example, small-scale manufacturing employs twice as many people, 5.8 million, compared to large-scale manufacture, which is 3 million. And but they get only 2% of the credit. So the most important thing is to provide more credit at cheaper rates, say 8%, plus technical support, which the provinces should provide, both on product design and others. I think to increase the flow of credit, there are certain constraints. For example, the 7th schedule of the income tax ordinance, which makes a provision for up to 5% write-offs in the case of losses, does not apply to SMEs. So if this is extended to SMEs and the construction sector, banks will be encouraged to lend. In this context, I think the State Bank has announced a scheme to provide loans to companies that retain their workers, but SMEs is not included. If that is done, then many SMEs will also be able to retain their workers. The next important sector is trade. As we all know, services sector is now almost 60% of the GDP, and 1/3 is trade, wholesale and retail trade. Again, it employs almost 10 million or 15% of the labor force. And this is a sector which has been seriously affected by the corona pandemic, especially in the informal sector, because most of the people who were earning in informal sector as traders and vendors have lost their jobs. Package has been prepared for traders in the formal sector, but not in the informal sector. So we need some innovative thinking for the future as a part of our medium-term plan to create special space in urban centers for these informal trade. For example, many countries have traffic-free pedestrian streets where vendors apply. There are, like this, our Sunday bazaars, there are many spaces, markets reserved for these vendors. This will also reduce harassment by the police, other officials, that all these rediwalas and vendors always, of course, in the short run, most of these informal traders will require income support. The next area is PSDP and the size of the PSDP. I think we have to move now from the stabilization policies under IMF that we have followed in the last 2 years to a growth-oriented policy. And the size of the PSD is a very important element of the growth-oriented policy. By way of example, in 2013 to 18 in our government, we tripled the size of the PSDP from 350 billion to 1,000 billion. The actual investment was 850. In the last 2 years, it has came down to 650, or even nobody knows what the actual expenditure was this year is, but it's at least 30% lower than 2017-18 if inflation is taken into account. Therefore, there is a very great need, and in my view, we should aim, despite the paucity of resources, a minimum of 800 billion rupees for PSDP, and hopefully we can borrow money from new institutions like BRICS Bank and the China's Infrastructure Bank and Silk Bank, which are new institutions and will be able to lend to us for this, apart from the World Bank and the Asian Bank. And we should give in this high priority to ongoing projects which are 70-80% complete, because they can result quickly and the cost overrun will be avoided, apart from then investment in water and the sectors that I mentioned earlier, which can divide. And my final point concerns income support, because that is the key, one of the most important challenges for the budget as to how, because the number of people needing support right now has tripled. BISP, Basic Income Support Program, was providing 5.5 billion after the reduction of 800,000. Right now, 4.5 million. But now, as the package announced on 26 March said, we are providing 1.2 billion people, 12 million people in this context, 12,000 rupees per person. So now, will the government, the budget this year before Corona was 180 billion for income support. Now, with the addition of this, we, depending on whether out of 45, the remaining 75, at least half may continue to need assistance even after the partial opening up or the closing, relaxation of the lockdown. So in my view, against 180 billion, which was in this budget, in the next budget, we will need 300 billion rupees for the income support program, finding an additional 120. We have, of course, received about 4.2 billion of international assistance, 1.4 billion from IMF, $500 million from the World Bank, $500 million from the Asian Bank, and about 1.8 billion debt relief announced by G20. Plus, we have some relief because interest rate has come down, so debt servicing will be lower. some relief because oil prices are lower. So how much will the budget provide for the income support? In my view, the estimate is at least 300 billion. So this is the big challenge for the budget in this context. And let's hope that the government will be able to accommodate. This is a very difficult and challenging time for the budget because, as I mentioned, the problems are multifarious and the resources, particularly with the slowdown in the economy, the tax revenues are likely not even regain this year the level reached in 2017-18. So with these words, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much, sir. That was very complete and I hope someone in the government is listening. Our next speaker is Dr. Zubair Khan. Dr. Khan has a doctorate in political economy from Johns Hopkins University. He was Commerce Minister of Pakistan in the 1990s when he also represented the country at the first ministerial conference of the WTO. Zubair Saab has worked in the World and IMF, where he gained exposure to a large number of economies, both industrial and emerging. He is recognized as an expert in several areas of economic policy making, among them macroeconomics and debt sustainability. In Wikipedia's words, because of his straight talk and knowledge of economics, he's a popular guest on TV. We look forward to his comments here. Zubair Saab.
Assalamu alaikum. Janab, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. It's a pleasure to be talking among such august company. So Taj Aziz Saab's comments are well, thank you so much. Humayun, well, assalamu alaikum. I'm sitting far away in Kanab, so I hope that my audio is good enough, even if my video is not, because I'm in my outdoor.
Zubair, you got your home back from the Taliban.
Well, yes, well, they never managed to get back to my house. So anyway, so we've been safe.
Okay.
Anyway, good to talk to everyone. I personally think that it was we need to have a totally rethink about government role and about the budget policy. Before we even entered the epidemic period, as has been noted by many people, Pakistan's economy was not doing well. We had adopted an adjustment program with the IMF, with which I had serious differences, and I've voiced them many times, but I'll quickly articulate the fundamental issues which continue till now with the economy. Number one, Pakistan's main macroeconomic problem. Pakistan's main macroeconomic issue has been the persistent and high the fiscal deficit. And that has led to very high debt. It has continued to rise. We were and we are still at a stage where the fiscal position is not sustainable. If you do a proper fiscal sustainability analysis, there are a number of issues that contribute to it. It is not just the primary deficit. It is also the high interest rates compared to the growth rate. Now, if the real interest rates are higher than the growth rate, it is straightforward from the fiscal sustainability analysis that it continues to contribute to an accumulation of a rise in the debt GDP ratio. Now, under these circumstances, Pakistan has not made any adjustment even after the adoption of the IMF program. So we were already in a bad state. And then when we were hit by the epidemic, Pakistan reacted on health grounds in the same manner as the countries that preceded Pakistan in facing the epidemic. These were all industrial countries, very advanced countries, which had a lot of, I would say, financial and capacity, and they locked down the economy. Pakistan also followed suit, but without much attention to the economic impact. So the choice between the health concerns and the economic concerns was totally distorted by our lack of understanding on how to respond. As a result of all of this, Pakistan's economy has plunged further down. Now, what can Pakistan do when we were already in a bad situation? The deficit was projected to be around 8% despite the IMF program. They were expecting an improvement in the primary deficit, but that is not the only thing. We adopted an interest rate policy which was totally detrimental to the economy. It has cost us nearly 3 trillion rupees in the budget on interest payments alone. And it had a very adverse impact on the private sector, which had slowed down the economy, according to my estimates, to below 2% even without the epidemic. Now, with the epidemic and the lockdown, it's anyone's guess what will happen to the overall GDP, but I think we will definitely go into the negative territory around 1 or 2%, with consequences for unemployment and poverty, increase in poverty. Pakistan was also facing difficulties because of our tax regime. It is a well-known fact that throughout the last 10, 15 years, the emphasis has only been on revenue generation. It is an established fact that tax policies have to look at not just the revenue impact, but the economic impact of taxes. We have totally ignored those at the cost of shutting down economy for many years gradually. It is not an accident that Pakistan's exports have stagnated for the last 10 years and that our manufacturing sector has been contracting. Our manufacturing sector is now less than 10% of GDP. From being peers of Korea in the mid-60s, our exports are barely $20-25 billion before the epidemic, and while Korea had reached 500 billion. So we were obviously on the wrong track. It had to do with our continued sort of reliance on import substitution, despite our rhetoric that we are export promoting. That is not indicated by our tariff regime. So under these circumstances, and then we had an exchange rate policy which was which was very distorted. We had kept the exchange rate fixed for too long. Now, when we did decide to make a major adjustment, we made an exchange rate change, which I think was the right thing to do, but we did not make a fiscal adjustment. Instead, the government, at the behest of the IMF, adopted a high interest rate policy. Now, there's no doubt that when you make a major exchange rate adjustment and you adjust energy prices, you have to adopt a very tight monetary policy. But high interest rates do not indicate a tight monetary policy. If you look at the overall growth rate of M2, total liquidity, that continued unabated. That is why inflation kept up before the epidemic. Now, post-epidemic, inflation has come down for other reasons. That's because we've shut down the economy even further. That is totally different. So given all of these situations, we have to now look ahead and say that look, this year's budget cannot be just simply based on tinkering here, tinkering there. There has to be a totally different approach. Number one, the country can ill afford to impose any more taxes. We have to not only not impose new taxes, we have to change the taxation policy and allow the private sector to breathe, to produce something, to export something. If they can't function, milking a cow to the point that we are bleeding the cow. The entire economy is going to shut down with the present approach towards taxation. So the fiscal deficit, which is going to rise further because the revenue is falling short very seriously. I'm looking at the 9-month data for the current fiscal year. It looks alarmingly bad. Now, the response is not further taxation, but the obvious answer lies in expenditures. And here is my main sort of issue with Pakistan's policies. Pakistan's government in all 5 governments, at the provincial and the federal level, this economy cannot sustain such a large size of government. It is high time to cut it down. There are a number of studies which show that the efficiency of public services is very low in Pakistan. We have over 3.5 million government employees in the 5 governments alone, and I'm not counting the 1,500 other government organizations, and I'm not counting the public sector, the PSEs, what we call it, the public sector enterprises. We have to drastically cut this down. Unless we cut down on that and save on interest payments, because interest rates right now, by the fiscal sustainability, by accounts of monetary policy, should not be more than 4 or 5% at this moment. We can save a lot more on interest payments in the budget also. But what we need to do is to cut down on the size of government. Unfortunately, till now, the Acts has been following on the PSDP. The public sector development funds should be continued. We have to, and this philanthropy, giving away billions and billions to the poor, yes, I wish we could afford it. But can we are setting not only a bad example, we are borrowing at expensive rates and giving away free money to the poor. No, we all need to do something about the poor. But this is not the manner. This is all politics playing a bigger role than actual social welfare. We need to target that, but the best thing we can do for the poor is to generate employment, to get the economy going, to get these people back to work. And for that, we have to look. The corona is here in Pakistan. Luckily, we are having a lower fatality rate. We are the spread is not too much, but the economy has to be stimulated again. But for that, we need to correct the mistakes that we have had in the macroeconomic framework, and we do that. We have to create the fiscal space first by lower interest rates, by cutting down on the size of the government. And of course, the most important point is that the last NFC award. The last NFC award and some elements of the 18th Amendment have essentially dismembered the federation in the fiscal sense. I've written much about it, and I would like to repeat that point over here, that we have devolved more funds. Look it up, but the provincial governments have not devolved them to the local government. And the public financial management is very poor in the private in the provincial governments. So we are seeing a lot of wastage of resources over there also. There might be a lot of more corruption also at the provincial government level. So we need to now spend our scarce resources very, very diligently. We have to now address this NFC issue as a national emergency. Unfortunately, the 18th Amendment has introduced a clause which says that the NFC share of the provinces cannot be lower than in the last NFC. Now, this is, I think, an infringement on another part of the Constitution. The Constitution makes it very clear, the articles dealing with the NFC, that it is the NFC which will determine the share of the provinces and the federation. How can another part of the Constitution impose a restriction? I think this can be challenged in the court, and when I come back from Kalam, that's one thing I plan to do, that I need to challenge this aspect also. But I'm already in the court on the interest rate policy, so there's limits to what one can do. But I'm afraid that the public debate is slipping out of the parliament because there's not much serious debate on these important issues. And there's so much emotional rhetoric and threats being hurled around. Some of these issues might have to be decided in the courts. I am not in favor that the Supreme Court should be indulging in this, but
we may have to wind up now.
On public television, we've run short. We're running out. Okay. So I'll just finish here that I think that we need to think of a major structural change in the approach to budget making, and a little bit of tinkering here and there is not the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to cut in. Those are two very special presentations, and as I said before, that I hope people are listening. I now turn to Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan, and the question that I would like to ask him is that does it do good to cut down welfare payment and continue the enormous amount of subsidies that the government is paying, or should we look at that aspect also? It's not even becoming to introduce Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan, but it is the form. He's an actuaries by education, known political and public figure. He's been elected 4 times to the National Assembly and has a decade of cabinet level experience. He's also the spirit behind our institute. And one of his stated goals is to strengthen the role of public institutions. And this organization is a testimony to his passion for that. I request Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan for his comments.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab. Mr. Sartaj Aziz, Zubair Khan, Faisal Bari, and Ahsan Malik Saab, welcome and greetings. Really appreciate. And of course, greetings to all the participants. My comments today will comprise 3 aspects of budget making, what in my view ought to be the goals of the coming budget, an analysis of developments taking place in Pakistan and the world, and why they are germane to the coming budget. And finally, I will share my recommendations. Now, many of us, in particular, Sartaj Aziz Saab has been in the annual budget process many times. And as we know, it's an estimate of a government's revenue and expenditure, and it becomes important only when it is part of a larger strategy of growth, or as is the case this year, of limiting the effects of a crisis. 50 years of focus on stability and austerity has left us with no long-term strategy. I always think that in Pakistan, and I've been in public service for 30 years, we move 2 steps forward and unfortunately then move back a step backwards, and sometimes more. In most years, the budget has been a statement of good intentions with considerable gap between words and deeds. And what the country needs is a strategy for economic development. What it gets each year is sad news, especially for the voiceless. And at this point, not because I know Sartaj Aziz Saab very well and we've worked together and I've learned a lot from him, I personally think that the real reforms that have been brought about in this economy were brought about by him in the early 90s. And I haven't really seen any significant reforms since then. My hope is that the scale of the present crisis will force us to rethink government's role in Pakistan, and government must shed years of apathy in policy making. The pandemic poses many challenges for us. Its one benefit could occur in the shape of a wake-up call that forces a restructuring of policy. I hope that the budget would reflect this shift. Bit on the pandemic. On the surface, it's a health problem. In reality, it is about the quality of governance and institutions. This crisis is not just a test for the scientists. As we are saying, not only in Pakistan, but elsewhere, inability to control its effect is a test of leadership. Knowing as we do the serious crossroads at which the world stands today, it is surprising that there is not a national debate on what may be in store for Pakistan. There is a major recession taking place in the world, even as we speak. We are seeing a global squeeze on liquidity, worse than the 2008 crisis. And today, this is a world without a leader. That is why it is critical for Pakistan to do everything possible in the best interest of the country. And it is critical that we take strategic stock of where we stand on many indicators of a dynamic society. I will urge that this budget must serve as the government's response to the challenge posed by the virus. It should prioritize activities that reduces the economic and health costs of the crisis, saves lives, and keeps our economic system running. In addition to the recession, this budget is being made in the shadow of many more negative developments. We are in a worrying stage of the pandemic with rapid rise in cases and no clear strategy to contain or suppress it. Scarcity of foreign exchange. Our exports have been in decline for some years. This year, July-April exports fell by 4% year-on-year. Decline in workers' remittances is imminent, and a lot of foreign exchange has left the country, while FDI or any private inflows are unlikely. Fall in GOP revenue, though July-March federal revenue grew by 33% thanks to SBP profits. It is bound to fall now as the recession sets in. If we do get debt relief, funds are needed in large sums for servicing of debt. This would take a large chunk of the budget. And in addition, we are still bound by IMF targets under the EFF. Its next tranche may well be contingent on the targets set in the budget. And therefore, government has some tough choices to make. On the one hand, health expenses and supports to the firms is critical. On the other, while some breach of targets agreed with IMF is possible, there will be no free ride. In addition, there are some framework issues with respect to budget making. My first point is that economic policy making is a top-level responsibility for elected officials. For years, we have experimented with outsourcing decision making. That has not worked. The economy operates in the marketplace. It touches the life of every Pakistani, not just the experts. Leaders may delegate this job, but they cannot delegate their responsibility. My second point is that government has to tackle special interest capture of state decision making. By special interest, I do not mean all large businesses. We must now correct the policies. Subsidies and guarantees to PSCs and rentier firms take away large sums of money from GOP's scarce resources and raise the cost of doing business. Funds used for subsidies would serve the country better if applied towards security, much needed services for firms and people, or to build up macro indicators. I support incentives for industry, but they should have a sunset of a few years, not of decades. Disbursements must be based on agreed criteria, and incentives must only be used to make an industry competitive so that it eventually can export globally. My third point is an appeal to policymakers to make simple policies, not overly clever ones. For over a year, Pakistan chased the chimera of foreign funds. We got foreign funds at very high interest rates. The tight monetary policy deepened and prolonged economic slowdown. And on the first hint of interest rate correction, the so-called hot money left. Fourth, this crisis has brought into sharper focus, has brought into ever more sharp relief the vast chasm in Pakistan's social deficit. Clearly, this is a political choice, as each year's UNHDI report does not even cause a ripple in the policy space in Pakistan. In 2019, our rank fell a further 5 places to 152nd of 189 countries. Economic growth is not possible without quality human capital. To quote an expert, a nation is empowered by its people. A people are empowered by their capabilities, and people's capabilities are created by investments in their health and education. Our economy cannot grow if we do not have the skills and the entrepreneurs that can fuel economic activity. One of the top goals for use of public funds is to improve private sector productivity. The social deficit's other more dire effect is the possible alienation of our youth. A large number of young people are out of the economic mainstream because they have not had the opportunity to build their capabilities. This dysfunctional system of social services has been called upon to deliver on the added burden of dealing with the health crisis. Such a broken system cannot do the job. I hope the budget would try to correct this situation. The coming federal budget and provincial budgets must therefore focus on, number one, the health expenditure to contain and suppress the virus. Allocate funds for PPEs, personal protective equipment, for health workers, for testing and tracing, isolation units, and more ICU beds. Number two, provide welfare to those who have lost livelihoods. Even if we lift the lockdown, its economic effect will not go away. Demand will not revive at once. Direct transfers must continue. Number three, keep the economy alive. Ministry of Finance and the State Bank of Pakistan must be aggressive in helping firms. State Bank has announced a number of schemes to prevent layoffs and for relief to businesses. I'm not sure if this is being granted liberally down at the ground level. Most SMEs and micro enterprises are in the informal sector and cannot avail bank loans. Government must reach out to help such firms. We cannot afford to let them sink because they hire the bulk of workers and supply goods and services to other firms. Number four, businesses large and small must receive concessional working capital. We must prevent large-scale closures of firms or job losses so that the economy revives as soon as demand picks up. Government may even create a fund for debt forgiveness. Number five, this year the federal government may consider giving more funds to provinces, though making it contingent on enhancing health capacity and other services for those in need. Number six, to manage the current account, GOP must prioritize imports for businesses over those for consumption. And number seven, government must review federal and provincial PSTPs and ADPs. It may put other projects on hold to spend more on health and services for the people. My overall position on stability is that we have pursued it for decades with no success. We should now think in terms of growth and exports. Yet, there are IMF targets to meet and we must not renege on our commitment. After the crisis, government must launch a growth plan. Macro stabilization is not an end in itself. It must serve a purpose. And usually that purpose is GDP growth to improve living standards of the people. Today, there is nothing more important than the lives of Pakistanis than survival of our firms. That should be our clearly stated goal. For our economy to come out of the crisis without a deep scar, it is important to put the effect of the pandemic behind us as soon as possible. If we ensure that, it is possible that we may see a sharp recovery. I recommend two more policy measures. Gradually, we must stop external borrowing for budget support. Payment of interest on foreign loans is a transfer of resources to other countries. Foreign loans must be acquired only to build exports that help repay loans. Also, it is critical that we encourage savings in Pakistan. The constant decline of savings rate is a huge concern. Coming budget should show that the government is leading with purpose and clear goals, as well as with words of comfort. People of Pakistan must know that they have a government that is focused on their welfare and economic survival. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much indeed. That was again very complete and profound. We are a little behind time, and that's not a hint to the next speaker. But I just want all participants to bear with us. We may be behind by 5 or 10 minutes. Dr. Faisal Bari is the next speaker. He's Associate Professor of Economics at LUMS with extensive research experience in the fields of industrial economics, development, and education. I will cut down on his introduction to save time. Just to say that Dr. Bari has a doctorate from McGill, MA from Punjab University, and BA Honours from Oxford. And as you know, he's been a regular columnist for The Dawn and the That's how I know him, and that's how many people know him. It's a pleasure for me to request for his comments. Thank you, sir, Dr. Parekh.
Thank you very much, sir. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a pleasure to be here in this August gathering. I want to be quite brief. I just want to make two larger points in today's presentation. One is around the idea that which I've been writing about for quite some time. There are a lot of the, I think, reforms that the government needs to go through are also at the micro level and not just the macro level. So property rights regimes, regulatory structures, structures of contract to do with market management, and issues of that sort that require a lot of work and very detailed work that needs to happen. What happens with our reform efforts, whether it's first wave, second wave, third wave, is we focus a lot more on the macro side. The micro work, which is much more detailed, but to me as important, if not more, gets usually neglected. And so what we get in reform is a very wonky reform effort that does not go to the basic structure of where we want the reforms to reach. Whether it is, look at any of the problems that have been talked about recently, whether it be the sugar case or any other cases that of competition, issues within health, issues within other areas, a lot of those are very, very micro issues that need to be dealt at the micro level. And this might obviously, after 18th Amendment, mean at provincial and sub-provincial level, but it is important to think about the micro from industrial structure point of view, as well as from other perspectives that I've mentioned. Now, the other thing it's very clear, all speakers have mentioned that tinkering will not do. The budget requires a major rethinking, though there is some, I think, disagreement with some of the speakers, in my case at least, where I think that there is a need for a rethink of the role of the government for sure. What this COVID-19 has also exposed is that the government's role in whether it's managing healthcare, public health, areas where there are large externalities, positive or negative, ability to govern, ability to manage resources and how they are spent, that needs to be looked at. And this is completely right, as Uwais also pointed out, that this should be the basis for how the budget and 3-year or 5-year plan needs to go ahead. But whether that means large cutting down of the role of government or actual more targeted expansions in some areas and cutting down in other, that I think needs a lot more work to be done. We need much more probably investments in public health area. We need investments in education, skill, a number of areas rather than less. Yes, there is a budget crunch, and so this will be very hard to sell, but I'm going to make a case for that in terms of at least education before I leave today. Let me start with education, because education and health, because those are areas that I've been working on for some time. This is a very old argument which goes back to Easterly and his paper on saying that there is a gap between where Pakistan's income per capita is and its performance on sectors in health and education. And that has been a consistent gap for many decades now. Given our comparator countries, where we should be on achievements in education and health are not where we are. And this is true for all health indicators, whether it be infant mortality, child mortality, malnutrition, mother health, average age, morbidity for figures, and on education, if you look at quality adjusted education figures, which the World Bank has given on number of years of schooling and so on, our achievements are very, very little compared to some of the countries, even in the band of our income. So it's not the case that we're comparing ourselves to the developed countries. It's the case that even in comparative countries, we are not doing that well. And that has been a consistent trend. Now, the problem, of course, is, and so it is even more surprising to have that given that our international commitments and even our constitutional commitments like 25A, which have been there now for 10 years, almost 2010 May 18th Amendment Treaty. Even after that, if we say that 20 million 5 to 16-year-olds are out of schools, then we actually have a huge problem of underinvestment in education, of not achieving what the promises are in various areas of education and health. And this is not a question just of not having the resources. That argument has been made many times. It is true that our resources have been tight, but other countries, as I said, other comparator countries have made choices about reallocation towards education and health, towards their youth, given their demographic differences, and even at times when they were facing crunch. Remember, the expansion towards mass education in US or Britain or even Japan did not happen when they were developed countries. It happened at a time when they were very underdeveloped countries and they were struggling themselves, but they were able to find those resources. So it's not just a question of resources, it's a question of priorities. Look at Lahore, for example. Last 30 years, we haven't made a single large hospital in the public sector. But at the same time, we have made plenty of underpasses and bypasses and overpasses and whatever not in Lahore, but not a single large hospital since Jinnah Hospital, I think, was created in the 80s or whenever that was after. That's a choice. It's not a issue of majburi or anything or lack of resources. It's a choice that this country and its leaders are making. They don't see the value of investing in education, health, and so on. And that's the result that we see in our growth and other figures. Now, here's the problem with COVID. We know that money is going to be even tighter. Already the federation, even though education, health are provincial subjects, but already the federation is asking the provinces to make cuts to manage the pressure that is coming for this year. They want to the provinces to post surpluses if possible so that the federal budget deficit and the budget deficits can be managed. So there's going to be additional pressure. But look at where we are on education right now. Not only is the fact that we weren't doing very well, there is tremendous pressure right now on a number of private schools because of obviously the closure and the fee issue and so on. So many private schools, especially the low-fee private schools, are going to struggle to stay open or to stay like any SME. They're also going to struggle going forward September, October, especially if closures, etc., continue. Even universities are under tremendous pressure, both public and private, and are really rethinking what they're going to do. And this was true even before the pandemic, especially for the public sector, but it is also true. After the pandemic, it's going to become even harder for even universities to sustain themselves. Now, at the same time, we know, and we have plenty of evidence of this, that closure of schools is going to cause learning losses. It is going to increase our dropout rates. It is going to have a differential impact on the poor, on girls, on geographically more distant places, on rural children more than urban children. All of those inequalities that are built into the system are going to get exacerbated by the COVID pressure. And so what needs to be done is to somehow not only remove existing inequalities, but actually to stop these inequalities from becoming even larger. But that's exactly what's going to happen, because obviously we know that the COVID pressure is going to come on health and education expenditures for sure. The other side of it, we also know that people's incomes and unemployment rate is going up. People's incomes are becoming difficult and going down. so there's going to be pressure from private side as well. So it's not going to be possible for many people to keep their children in the schools there where they were pre-pandemic. Are we going to help those people or not? If not, we should definitely then see, we should be prepared for having an impact on enrollment as well as on achievement after the school open in the fall, for the fall period. Now, bringing all of this together, I again say two things. Biggest question is, do we rethink the role of government in these areas or not? It's not enough to say that we increase the pressure for, increase the payment through social protection process. That has to be done, agreed, because of unemployment, because of income shock, that has to be done. But the issues in education and health are deeper, more longer term, and require much more sustained effort. For that, the budget can make a start, but that will require a major restructuring and rethinking and reorientation, and most importantly, reprioritization of expenditure, which I personally think we are not in a, right now, we are definitely not in the mood to do that. So for me, it looks like that the budget is going to be, yes, it will try to manage deficits, it will try to give some stimulus, etc. But it is going to be another disappointment from health and education perspective. Let me stop here. We can come back to have more discussion when that happens.
Thank you, Dr. Barisab. That was, of course, I'm tired of repeating myself. That was certainly brilliant. I want to give a question with you, sir, to be discussed during the question and answer session, which is that this neoliberal thinking, has that filtered into our economic decision making a little too much because we are so dependent on donors, or is it is a total disregard of the majority of Pakistanis? But that, please discuss it during question and answer. I want to leave that thought with you. Last but not the least, Mr. Ehsan Malik. He's the Chief Executive Officer of and Director of the Eminent Pakistan Business Council. Before this, he was CEO of Unilever Pakistan, where he had a long career, having been posted in many countries. Chartered accountant, a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and also an alumni of both Wharton and Harvard Business Schools. And I don't think we could have had a better person from the private sector to discuss economic revival. Welcome, Mr. Malik.
Assalamu alaikum ji. Ashraf Saab, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I am so delighted that you said last but not the least, and take this remark in a positive note. Unfortunately, the tax-paying private sector is considered the least important, particularly when the budget is being set. But that said, I want to thank the eminent speakers who have really set the macro economic situation, exceedingly well, much better than I could do. And to use a golfing term, my ball is in our teeth very well, and now all I have to do is to shoot in the right direction and hope that the ball remains on the fairway. So let me make a start. First of all, even before the COVID crisis hit us, Pakistan or industry in Pakistan was on the way down. Pakistan was prematurely deindustrializing. Each year, its representation in GDP was declining. There is a long-term trend and a long-term relationship, a very close relationship between the rate of manufacturing growth and the rate of GDP growth. And in each of the years where manufacturing goes down, surely GDP follows, maybe with the 18-month lag and sometimes with the 12-month lag. Our export share was down versus Bangladesh in the last 15 years or so. Theirs more than doubled. Ours went down significantly. The rate of investment in the country as a percent of GDP has been declining, and the latest year is no different. We had a hugely pro-import, fiscal policy. We did not have cascading import tariffs and so on. So there was significant defects in a fundamental issues confronting the economy. And Pakistan Business Council was amongst the major thrust that it was following was something that we call Make in Pakistan. And the Make in Pakistan, the primary focus of that was to generate jobs, but also to promote value-added exports, not just exports of commodities, also import substitution, and indeed import substitution. So these were the major focus of what we were trying to do. Now, coming back to the current crisis, I mean, one way to look at it is that it is a crisis. I prefer to look at that as an opportunity. Indeed, you could turn it around and say this would be really a very unfortunate crisis wasted if all the political parties and all the stakeholders don't get together and agree on something that I call a national economic action plan. You know, when all the parties and the government got together on the national action plan, Pakistan made a huge progress in fighting the terrorism. Yeah, this is not business as usual. These are not times as usual. The country is facing an acute crisis. It was barely out of a significant economic crisis earlier, but now we are deeper into that. I think all the political parties, all the stakeholders need to come together and adopt a national economic action plan. Yes, we are in an IMF program, but I think IMF, if it ever was in a listening mode, it should be in a listening mode today. Many of the countries in the IMF program have approached it and they found latitude, and I think Pakistan should also find latitude. The 200-300 billion that we are trying to get as per the reports yesterday is not going to be sufficient. Pakistan to date has spent between 1.5% to 2% of its GDP on the economic revival. India across the border has spent 10% of its GDP. So there's a significant work to be done. So I think if you move forward and come to the budget, I believe that the budget needs to be very focused and targeted. Yeah. First of all, we must identify what are the sectors and where geographically, where should the major thrust of the economic revival be. In my opinion, whilst agriculture remains important and while 60% or plus of the population resides in the rural sector, they have been the least affected to date by the COVID crisis. Bulk of the impact has come on the urban industrial workers. Yeah. So first of all, we should be very clear in whatever policies that we agree upon, that the major benefit of that should really be coming into the bigger cities, because that is where the concentration of the population is. That is where COVID has hit the deepest. That is where the industry has suffered the most from the lockdown. Agriculture remains important. It goes without saying. There's already a fertilizer subsidy. There's a wheat purchase program which has been upped. The anti-locust strike, by the way, locust is yet another crisis that we would threaten our food security, but we'll park that for the time being. The focus on cotton is very appropriate, and not to take away anything from those initiatives. But really, the bulk of the benefit needs to come to the cities, the urban areas, and to the people who work in the industry. So I think one should be very clear on that. Secondly, clearly, bulk of the benefit should flow to the common man, to the common person. They are the people who've been most affected. We estimate that there are 25 million people who have become unemployed as a result of the crisis. The SARS program to date has impacted or positively impacted 15 million people in whatever little or great way that it has done. So there's still a 10 million unemployed population that needs to be helped in one way or the other. Obviously, direct benefit would be the right way to do it, but then assisting the industry to create the employment would be the better way to do that. So how can we help the common person, right? And here we have to go back to the slogan that another party had adopted. Now, I don't think any particular party has a monopoly over good concepts. So roti, kapda, and makan, unfortunately or fortunately, are again the focus of what this particular budget should be driving towards. We should help people in what nourishes people, whether it's food or milk. We should help people by what they wear, that is clothing. We should help people in where they live, which is obviously housing, which also happens to be a government priority. We should help people get to work in whatever form, whether it's public transportation by bringing the cost down, or whether it is the motorcycles or whatever, buses, etc. And we should help people buy the kind of domestic appliances they use at home. So therefore, helping the common person should be the priority. How are we going to do this, and what are the categories? So we talked about that. Milk, food needs to come down. Taxation on that. Textiles, taxation has to come down. Cement, steel, building materials, again, taxation has to come down on that. Whether it is to GST or through other formats, doesn't matter. I mean, you'd be surprised to hear that excise duty, which is normally levied on tobacco or on carbonated beverages, is also levied on cement. Now, do you want to encourage cement consumption in your housing, or do you not? You need to make up your mind. Fuel has come down, so that's really good. Motorcycles is what the public at large uses to transport. Fortunately, there's also capacity. We can come to capacity now. Where is the capacity today? Capacity is in these industries. Textiles is not able to meet its entire capacity by exporting because the global demand isn't there and won't be there for the foreseeable future. So we should help the textile industry employ people by helping to bring down and make clothing more affordable in the domestic market. It is the domestic market that will drive the economy as we go forward, at least for the next 6 to 9 months, perhaps even a year to 18 months. We are very fortunate that we have 220 million consumers that we can use. How are we going to do that? Industry requires liquidity, and industry requires lower cost of operation, and they want ease of doing business. We need to reduce the withholding taxes. Yeah, you cannot have minimum taxes on industry which is based on turnover. You could actually never fundamentally or conceptually justify that, because that is actually a barrier to entry of new people into the economy. So you must do away with minimum taxes, or you must reduce them substantially. You must reduce advanced taxes. Each quarter, the taxman arrives and takes the next quarter's percentage of the next quarter's earnings. And they base it on the past performance, the same quarter last year. Well, that's not going to be helpful. We need to revive the incentives for investment. Investment is already down. There were tax credits available until the last budget, they were taken away. We need to have cascading tariffs. I think that was a point made earlier. Raw materials should come in at virtually no duty, intermediate items at a slightly higher duty, and then obviously finished goods at a higher duty. So that would help production. A little bit on the construction sector. Yes, we need to revive construction. The borrowing costs need to come down. And so far, the State Bank of Pakistan has been obsessed with inflation. The latest inflation number that's come in at 8.2%. If you take away the food-induced inflation, which has nothing to do, and there is no role for the monetary policy to help fight food inflation, that's a shortage created. Yeah? If you take that away, the underlying inflation, is only 4.08%. So sustaining the current, borrowing cost does not really make any sense. We need to have obviously foreclosure laws, and we need to revive the credit.
So thank you very much. That was another very good presentation and some excellent points for us to share with the government before long. The way to ask questions, we opened this, and the way to ask a question is to find the raise hand tab. And if you can't find it, you'll have to scroll down, see where participants is. A panel will open to your side, or a box will open, and then you can click raise hand. As soon as you raise your hand, I will ask you to, I will ask Nabil to unmute you and ask a question. Are there any questions, please? So Tariq, you have a question. Tariq Hamid is actually tuned in from London. Did you want to go ahead, please? Nabil, Tariq Hamid साहब का जरा unmute कर दें.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab, and Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I had actually three questions. First of all is, how do we improve the quality of our basic human capital? Speaking the truth and doing our job professionally, because that will have an impact on our human capital. And it will have a positive impact both on our fiscal and monetary situation. The second question is basically a comment and a question. A simple policy with an efficient implementation process yields much better results compared to a sophisticated policy with an inefficient implementation process. How do we simplify our government and improve efficiency? And the third question to the panel was that all government funds are trust money. How do we change the colonial mentality of our government structure to one of an independent state? And I had a meeting many years ago with a senior bureaucrat, and one of the points, who was a family friend, a very close family friend, and one of the points I did make to him even then was that the government of Pakistan has failed to graduate from a colonial government to a government of an independent state. And that question, I think, is still very valid. I will request the
Thank
panel.
you. Thank you, Tariq. We have two more questions, actually three. Caroline Bates, Hamid Hassan Saab, and I saw Ambassador Mansoor's name a little while ago, somehow disappeared. We have Rashid Khan and Saira. So we'll start with Caroline Bates. Nabil, zara ye unmute kar dein. Go ahead, Caroline.
Thank you, Saad. Can you hear me?
Yes, very much.
Great. My name's Caroline Bates. I'm from the International Labour Organization based in Islamabad. I have a particular question of relevance to my area of work, which is to support Pakistan's textile and ready-made garment industry. Prior to the COVID crisis, textiles and RMG made up the largest contribution of industrial contribution to GDP. And from what we can see globally, the impact on textiles and RMG is likely to be enormous, with very substantially decreased demand in Europe and North America, partly because of the current crisis and enterprises and brands and retailers being closed, but also high levels of unemployment. And I wonder what the panelists feel about what the likely impact of that will be. I assume a significant decrease in the contribution to GDP. And I wondered also whether they could expand on the very interesting point, which was foreseeing increased reliance on the domestic market.
All right, thank you. We'll go to the speakers to answer those questions. Once we've taken in 4 or 5. So we have 3 more hands here, and let me go in this order. Nabil, aap zara unmute kar dein. Teenon ko. Hamid Hassan Saab, Saira's iPad, it says, Saira, and Rashid Khan Saab. Hamid Hassan Saab, please.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. I would like to make a few short comments. Firstly, as suggested by Dr. Zubair Khan, this will have to be sort of a new kind of budget. We have to get away from the routine exercise of budget making, because there are too many problems, economic problems that are facing us, which have been further sort of aggravated by the COVID crisis. So we have to have a new thinking, a new paradigm for our budgetary exercise, as well as I think we need new economic policies, a rethink on our economic policies, basic fundamental changes in our economic policies, for which we probably will have to appoint a committee or a commission or something that will give suggestions as to what changes, basic economic changes in our economic policies are required to be made. Now, secondly, the two sectors that were highlighted by Sartaj Aziz Saab, which can help our economy, is agriculture and construction industry. Now, the agriculture, unfortunately, although it is showing a growth, and it is a hopeful sign, and agriculture is the rural areas are least affected by the coronavirus epidemic. But unfortunately, we are facing another very serious threat, and that is the locust attack. We have to take very serious notice of this, and we have to address it very urgently, because this is going to affect our food security. And secondly, it is also going to affect our exports capacity, because many of our exports, large exports, are agriculture based. So it is going to really harm us unless we address this thing. And another factor that's going to come in, actually, as they say, adversity doesn't come alone. So the other factor is the climate change, the global warming, that may bring a large floods this year. And flooding, as you know, takes away everything in the agriculture sector. So we have to be very sort of wary about these looming threats, and we have to make preparations for meeting them. And the third thing is, I think we have to, at least for this current year, the forthcoming budget, we have to get away from the usual debate about balancing the budget. It has to be a corona budget, because our most pressing problem is providing relief to the poor, who is without any livelihood. We have to find ways to provide relief to the poor, and we have to find means for that. Apart from the economic relief that the government claims to have provided in the ESAS program, through the ESAS program and VISP, which is not really delivered as yet. There are so many bureaucratic red tapes and procedural problems in the delivery, and not many people have received those reliefs that have been claimed that the government made provision for. And secondly, I think we have to think of restarting our industry, just as European countries are doing. We have to make special provisions in our industrial units for protection from coronavirus infections, and we have to start the industry. There is no other way you can provide economic relief to the poor. So these are the two observations.
Thank you, Hamid Hassan. Those are good observations. We have these three questions, and then we have a slew of people who've shown their interest to ask questions. So I'll go back to them. But first, Mr. Sartaj Aziz to respond, please.
Well, I agree with most of the comments, particularly the problem of deindustrialization and the need to revive the industrial sector. Because without that, I think we can't revive the economy as a whole. It's a much deeper structural problem. We have surplus capacity in industries that we have, and we haven't gone to value-added industries like electronics, engineering, chemicals, where we have scope in the future. So it's a much more difficult problem, but at least for the time being, we must concentrate on reviving what we have. I also agree with the last speaker about the problem of locust. It's a real pity that the locusts this time were laying eggs in our own Balochistan area, and that is the only time when you can really effectively tackle them, and we did not tackle them. So I hope now that NDMA has taken over, they will identify all the places where corona can, locust can breed for the next period and destroy them before they become birds. And I think this is very important, otherwise our efforts will be. The rest of the comments are well taken, and I hope other speakers will answer.
I just want to remind you of one question that was asked by Tariq Hamid, that do we suffer from a colonial mentality in making, I know this is a very sort of a broad area, but
of course we are, because you see the basic task of the colonial master was to control and regulate everything. By comparison, for example, Korea and Japan, the bureaucracy played a very major role of promoting and helping the private sector and the industries, both technically and financially and otherwise. But in our case, we presume that all the people are out to steal money or so on and so forth. So without this, and our mentality has not changed much, so that's why our only answer was to take the government out of as many things as possible, so they can't regulate very much. And that I don't think it'll be easy to change the mentality of our. One answer, of course, is decentralization. If you have local governments and decentralized governmental function lower down, it will probably be easier to have more supremacy of elected people at the local level. But this is a longer term issue, and I don't think our bureaucracy will change in the short run. So we have to reduce their role and make the private sector less dependent on the bureaucracy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and the answers. I want to ask the other speakers, do they want to come in now, or should I take 3 or 4 questions more? Humayun sir? Okay, I'll take questions now. I think it says Saira iPad, it says.
Saira Dar, yeah.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Well, my question is kind of similar to Mr. Hamid Hassan, and my immediate concern was the locust invasion also, because it's a double whammy for us, the COVID and the locust. And agriculture is very important. So again, I was looking for answers, from somebody who's in the government, Humayun Akhtar Saab, perhaps, how they're going to cope with it, and also how the small landholder can be helped. And the second one was related to water scarcity, which again is going to be hitting us very soon. And that's my concern, the immediate concern. And even very small things regarding the water thing. For example, like for the COVID thing, we keep on telling people कि जी आप हर वक्त हाथ धोएं और 30 seconds धोएं and things like that. So I mean, I've been campaigning for conserving water कि जी कम पानी इस्तेमाल करिए. So I mean, I think a few educational reinforcements for the public, how to conserve water and things like that. Because I mean, water is going to be a very major problem. So these are my 2 concerns. Thank you.
Nabil Tasneem Nurani साहब को unmute कर दें, please. Tasneem साहब.
Well, thank you very much, IPR, and thank you very much, Ashraf, for inviting me. And I think it's been a very interesting interaction after a long time. With this lockdown, one is completely locked out from these kind of activities, and Zoom, I think, is a great facilitator. I just wonder that we have these meetings prior to the budget, and we talk about the next 1 year, and we try and bring in the best minds, and we try and find solutions. But the issue is that, every year we still debate. After every 12 months, we debate what our taxation policy should be, what our export policy should be. Should we be an import substitution? Should we be an export? Then we are still debating whether we should concentrate on agriculture or industry. And, we are still debating whether we should have a big public sector development program for, sort of greater participation, economic growth, etc. So all the issues that are primary importance in any economic policy, we start ab initio every year. Now, is that a way of, running a nation? I'm not even talking of a country. That can we ever go forward? Because, as Humayun said, we get 2 steps. We got 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. And actually, look at the tax returns, the tax collections. Look at the export earnings. Look at your remittances or your GDP growth. Everything is down in the dumps. Of course, Corona is now an excuse, but even prior to Corona, it was that. So my question is that, unless you have a 5-year approach or a 5-year strategy, and you follow that, even in private companies, they have, a CEO comes and he has or a board of directors has a certain strategy. Country can't really grow, or a country can't really take make any progress unless we have a 5-year policy. And I haven't seen anybody talk about a long-term plan or a strategy. I thought the best suggestion that came was from Ehsan Malik, Saab, saying that, I think we should really have a consensus national action economic plan, and any individual decisions by the present finance minister or the present prime minister is going to be a non-starter. It's, it's going to be neither here or there.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We're really running short of time. I'll ask the speakers to bear with us, and There's two left. Now I go to Dr. Manzoor. Manzoor?
I agree with Sartaj Aziz Saab that we need to devolve further to get rid of many of our problems. But I heard Dr. Zubair saying that we open up the NFC award and move back some of the resources to the federation. I think if we do that, we are going to bring more problems to our society. I think it's not the right time to go back and reopen this 18th Amendment and NFC award issues.
Okay, good. Thank you. Dr. Ikrar sir? You may have to unmute yourself, Dr. sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I just want to flag something very interesting which I saw in the news last night. Sartaj Saab has rightly pointed out the case of agriculture and a lot of interest taken by the audience. And then I would like to pick a comment made by Humayun Khan Saab, debt forgiveness. With these two key words, last night on the TV, there was a ticker running that Zarai Taraqqiyati Bank shall hire transgender people to go to the doors of borrowers and knock their doors, probably do a dance party in front of their doors. There can't be any more humiliating gesture on the part of public institutions. Sartaj Saab has mentioned the credit, which has remained dismal all along, and on top of that, insult to the injury that we will have transgenders dancing in front of Kisan, and then we expect that Kisan will also perform, who will be named and shamed. So this is one thing. And then about locust. That FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, was created primarily to initially to fight the global disease and pest challenges. And the pest starts in Africa, goes through Middle East, comes through Iran, and enters Balochistan. And then we wake up more than a year after its original entry. What we are seeing here right now is something which has entered more than a year ago. And there was FAO then. And then we have a federal department called as DPP, Department of Plant Protection, which has the entire responsibility of surveillance and fighting this pest. And where was that DPP sleeping? Now that NDMA has taken over, we better see these organizations disband before NDMA continue to work on the job which was supposed to have been done by DPP and FAO. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good point. Rahmatullah Javed sir, we'll have to keep it short because there are many requests and the speakers really have to go. We are 10 minutes over already.
Thank you very much.
Please. Yes, please. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, IPR. And I would say this is a great session for a way forward. And we have been discussing all type of policies that we need to improve our economic conditions. I would like to suggest here, first of all, that SME is one of the most important sector of our economy and contributing greatly. Everybody knows, Humayun Saab said about it, Sartaj Aziz mentioned about it, and everybody said about it, but we are ignoring this sector repeatedly every time in every budget. And I believe to understand after such a great session, we must have an exclusive session of SMEs before budget so that we can highlight what is being done by SMEs, because SME is contributing almost like 30 to 40% to the exports, and employment generation is so great that not a large sector can do it. I also like to comment on PBC. PBC is doing a wonderful job, but it is about the time, Ehsan Malik Saab, that PBC should start talking about SMEs, because we see that your research work is also contributing a great, and of course I agree that low tax collection and low remittances are making problems for us, but again SME is the only sector which can provide us a survival at these COVID times. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Rahmatullah Javed Saab. Just two more questions. One is Naeem Ilyas Saab and Nabil, इनको unmute कर दें, और Mohammad Rafiq Saab. Danish, you might have to wait for another event. Naeem Ilyas Saab and Mohammad Rafiq Saab. Go ahead, Naeem Ilyas.
Hello.
Gee, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Basically, I'm interested to discuss the participation of the people, and the people participation comes from the effective implementation of 140A and 32 of the Constitution. Unfortunately, we have not been implementing this. Why? I don't know. I would like to have the opinion of Sartaj Aziz Saab, who has been experienced in this field and the government also. Unless you have a local participation, you won't be able to have an effective budget, bottom-up approach for budgeting process. So I would like to have the opinion of Sartaj Aziz Saab basically, because he has been in the government for last many years and have done a good job for the country as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rafiq. Okay, I think we'll go to the, I don't see any raised hands anymore, and Zainab may have left. We'll go to Humayun Saab and Dr. Faisal Bari. Faisal Bari Saab, do not take offense that you will be the second to respond, but Humayun Saab is probably a bigger taxpayer than you and I, so perhaps he first. Humayun Saab. Humayun Saab.
Ashraf Saab, what question do you want me to answer?
Okay, there was a question on local government. There was a question on NFC that Dr. Manzoor asked. Let me see. Dr. Ikrar asked the question of, are we being too intrusive by insulting people who may have to default because of the coronavirus? And then before Sartaj Aziz Saab asked, there was the question of not doing enough for the social sector, not having a national economic policy, as Tasneem Nurani Saab asked. Those are the things. You can cover any that you want, and then I'll go to Faisal Bari Saab.
Yeah, okay. Look, local governments, I think, are very important, and I would make quite a revolutionary statement here. When I hear Pakistan having more provinces, I always believe, although at one time I was a proponent of more provinces, but now I think that getting into this area of more provinces would open a can of worms, and instead I am a big proponent of local governments being empowered, and also in favor of provincial finance awards, which use more or less the same principle that the NFC uses to distribute funds amongst the provinces, and the provinces then should distribute funds on the same basis, on the size, on the poverty level, on population to the local governments. Very definitely, the NFC award, there's no harm in discussing. As of right now, a lot of people think that the NFC is linked to the 18th Amendment. The only thing in the NFC award that is linked to the 18th Amendment is the fact that under the 18th Amendment, you can't lower the award in subsequent years. It can't go below what had already been agreed. You can certainly increase it. But I think that to change, as we say, to change the NFC would mean a constitutional amendment, which I don't think is the kind of an area we should dabble into at the moment. I don't think we will have a consensus, and I don't think we will be able to change. Right now, as I made a remark, I think we should be supporting the provinces more, provided those funds head to, healthcare or areas related to the effects of the coronavirus and how to handle those. So I'm not in favor of, I can't say that we must never touch the NFC, because the NFC and any change in the constitution or any change in a law is a prerogative of the parliament, and therefore we cannot say whether it must be done or must not be done. There is the debate on the social sector has always been there, and I think that Faisal Bari made a very pertinent remark that, and I began to think about it, and he was right, that over the last 30 years, there has not been a single large public hospital built in Lahore, and I'm sure that that's the situation elsewhere in Punjab and most of the country too. So, I mean, the social sector has been neglected for a long time, and true that we are short of resources and we spend our resources like in the public sector enterprises, which is a huge black hole which we're not prepared to tackle, and subsidies that many times are not warranted and not giving the benefit to the state that they should. But yes, a social sector debate must start, and we should start spending a bit more on health and education. This is a good time to, as Tasneem Noorani Saab said, to start looking at a national economic policy. I think Sartaj Aziz Saab also said we should have a 1-year emergency plan and then 3-year or maybe a 5-year plan. And it'd be nice if all the major parties in the parliament can participate in this national action plan. So that's all I have to say.
Right. There was a question asked by Caroline Bates about, I think she said that, well, about the labor situation and about depending more on the domestic market than on exports. I could be paraphrasing her wrong. If you want, Caroline, you could text it to me and on the chat, and I will ask that question. Faisal Bari Saab, please.
Thank you very much. But I think Humayun Saab has already talked about the education sector. There were not questions on that sector anyway. So all I want to say is on the industrial side, I just want to make one point. There have been a number of points made there. My own feeling, I still want to go back and plug the idea that I had, that a lot more work on the reform area needs to be done at the micro level to figure out what regulatory structures have to be created and how to make them effective. And this is in many different areas and across the board, even on the side of legal review, law reviews, reform in our competition issues, reforms in labor markets, and so on. Uske baghair, I think the effectiveness of any response that you require from macro stimulus is not going to come. It will always be distorted. And so I'll just make a plug for that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, sir. May I just conclude this and thanking the speakers, but also all of the participants who made very good observations. I wanted to say something about the NFC and the 18th Amendment. I think it's become an excuse for the federal government not to deliver. The 18th Amendment of the, or the NFC does not say that the federal government cannot deliver. All it says is that that the provinces, and this is a federation, it's not a unitary form of government, the provinces should have more say. In the US, we've all visited US, and we will see that this state taxes change, the sales tax on your purchases change every state. They have their own, that's because sales tax is a state subject. Over here it's a federal subject, and it's the biggest contributor. I just asked to pose a polemical question. The NFC award came 11 years ago. How much good did the federal government do by having all those resources to itself? Did we have a single year of zero financial deficit or financial surplus or current account deficit? No, and we have no idea where the money went. We have no idea where so much foreign exchange that came during the Musharraf years, President Musharraf years, where did they go? Because soon as the government changed in 2008, we were back to the IMF with a 40% devaluation. I'm not quite sure that the federal government does a great job with our taxes, frankly, and there has to be a rethink there also, as pointed out. Let me leave it at that for the time being. Thank you all again very much. I will especially thank the speakers. Let's end the meeting, and thank you.